Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
Imagine coming home one day to find out that your childhood memories, everything you'd cherished and saved, had been sold off like junk. That's exactly what happened to me. But when my parents asked me to forgive my sister for selling my childhood toys, they had no idea I was about to show them proof that she kept all the money for herself. It all started on a crisp Saturday morning when I decided to visit my parents for the weekend. It had been months since I'd last been home, and I was looking forward to the nostalgia of it all. Eating my mom's cooking, catching up with my dad, and digging through the attic where my childhood treasures were stored. As a kid, I had been meticulous about saving things that meant something to me. Action figures, board games, trading cards. Everything had its place in carefully labeled boxes stacked neatly in the attic. I had dreams of passing those items down to my own kids someday, or at the very least, reliving some of those memories when I needed a dose of simpler times. But when I opened the attic door, I immediately knew something was wrong. The familiar stack of boxes I'd spent years organizing was gone. Not shuffled around, not covered by something else, just gone. The shelves where they had once been were completely bare, except for a few stray pieces of packing tape clinging to the wood. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what I was seeing. My first thought was that my parents must have moved the boxes. Maybe they'd rearranged things to make space for something else. But as I went back downstairs to ask, an uneasy feeling started creeping in. "Hey, Mom," I said, leaning against the kitchen counter. "Did you move my stuff from the attic? My old toys and collectibles?" My mom looked up from the soup she was stirring and gave me a confused smile. "Your toys? No, we haven't touched anything up there." "Why?" "They're not there," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "The boxes are gone." She frowned, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "That's strange. Maybe your dad moved them. I'll ask him when he gets back from the hardware store." That explanation seemed reasonable enough, until my sister, Jess, walked into the room. Jess had always been the wild card in our family. She had a knack for getting herself into trouble, and an even better knack for talking her way out of it. As soon as I saw her reaction to the conversation, I knew something was up. "Are you sure you didn't just imagine them being there?" she said, her tone deliberately casual. I raised an eyebrow. "Imagine them?" "Jess, I've had those boxes in the attic for years. I didn't just dream them up." She shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "I mean, maybe you just forgot where you put them or something. It's not a big deal." It was the way she said it that set off alarm bells in my head. The too innocent tone, the way she immediately jumped in with an excuse. It didn't add up. Jess wasn't exactly known for her honesty, and her reaction felt more like damage control than genuine curiosity. "Do you know something about this, Jess?" I asked, my voice steady but firm. Her eyes darted to the side, and she let out a laugh that sounded a little too forced. "Me? No. Why would I know anything about your old junk?" "It's not junk," I said, crossing my arms. "And you're acting weird?" Jess rolled her eyes and grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl. "You're being paranoid. I don't know what happened to your precious toys, okay? Maybe the attic ghosts took them." With that, she turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me more suspicious than ever. The rest of the day, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jess knew more than she was letting on. She'd always been quick with excuses, but this felt different. There was something about her body language, the way she couldn't meet my gaze, the way she rushed to deflect the conversation, that made me think she wasn't telling the whole truth. That night, as I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, I replayed the conversation in my head. Jess's reaction wasn't just suspicious, it was guilty. And if there was one thing I knew about my sister, it was that guilt meant she'd done something she wasn't supposed to. I didn't have any proof yet, but I was determined to find out what had really happened to my toys. Whatever Jess was hiding, I was going to get to the bottom of it, even if it meant uncovering something I didn't want to know. By the time dinner rolled around, my suspicions about Jess were gnawing at me like an itch I couldn't scratch. Her reaction earlier hadn't just been dismissive, it was calculated. Jess wasn't one to pass up an opportunity to make a snarky comment or poke fun at me. Yet she'd been oddly careful with her words. It was like she didn't want to say anything that could implicate her. That night, as the house quieted down, I decided it was time to confront her. Jess was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone with one hand and lazily munching on a bag of chips with the other. She looked up briefly when I walked in, but didn't say anything. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. "Jess, do you know what happened to my toys?" She didn't even look up from her phone. "Nope. Why would I?" Her nonchalance only made me more suspicious. "Because you're acting like you do," I said, keeping my tone calm. "And you've always had a knack for making things disappear." Jess finally set her phone down, rolling her eyes dramatically. Oh, come on. Are you seriously accusing me of stealing your stuff? I have no idea where your toys are. Maybe Mom and Dad got rid of them. They said they didn't, I countered. Maybe they forgot, she said with a shrug. Or maybe you're remembering wrong. It's been years, Sam. Her flippant tone was grating, but it was her body language that gave her away. Jess was always confident, borderline cocky, but now she couldn't seem to stay still. Her fingers fidgeted with the edge of the chip bag, and she avoided making eye contact. You sure about that? I pressed, stepping closer, because I know you've been selling stuff on eBay. I've seen your listings. That got her attention. Jess's face turned a noticeable shade of red, and she froze for just a moment before quickly recovering. You're being paranoid, she said, her voice a little too defensive. I haven't touched your stupid toys. Why would I even want them? I don't know, I said, narrowing my eyes. Maybe because you thought you could make some quick cash? Jess let out a sarcastic laugh. Wow, Sam. Real mature. You think I'm some kind of master thief now? Sorry to burst your bubble, but I've got better things to do than dig through your childhood junk. Her words were meant to sound dismissive, but I could hear the edge in her voice. Jess wasn't just annoyed. She was rattled. I decided to push a little harder. If you didn't take them, then you won't mind showing me your eBay account, I said, keeping my tone casual. She froze again, her hand hovering over the chip bag. What? You heard me, I said. Let me see your eBay account. If you didn't sell my stuff, you've got nothing to hide, right? Jess's eyes darted around the room like she was looking for an escape route. Why would I show you my account? That's personal. You don't see me snooping through your stuff. I'm not snooping, I said. I'm asking for proof. If you didn't do anything, it should be easy. Jess's face hardened, and she crossed her arms. I'm not showing you anything, Sam. This is ridiculous. You're acting like a crazy person over a bunch of old toys. Maybe I wouldn't be acting this way if you didn't have a history of lying, I shot back. Her jaw clenched, and for a moment, I thought she might actually admit to something. But then she grabbed her phone and stormed out of the kitchen, muttering something under her breath about how I was being impossible. As I watched her leave, my suspicions solidified into certainty. Jess was hiding something. It was written all over her face. The question was, how far had she gone? I wasn't about to let her brush me off. If she thought she could make this go away by playing the victim, she was wrong. Whatever Jess was hiding, I was going to find it. And when I did, she wouldn't be able to deny it. That night, as I lay in bed, I started formulating a plan. If Jess thought she could outsmart me, she was in for a rude awakening. This wasn't just about toys anymore. It was about trust, and Jess had just given me a reason to doubt hers completely. After my tense confrontation with Jess, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was onto something. Her defensiveness, the way she avoided eye contact, and her refusal to show me her eBay account all screamed guilt. I decided it was time to take matters into my own hands. The next morning, I waited until Jess left the house. She'd mentioned meeting up with some friends, which gave me a window of opportunity to dig deeper. I remembered that Jess had been using the same online handle for years. Her favorite combination of her nickname and a random number she thought was cool as a teenager. I figured it was as good a place to start as any. I grabbed my laptop and typed her username into eBay's search bar. My heart raced as I waited for the results to load, half hoping I was wrong, but knowing deep down that I wasn't. The first few listings that popped up were generic items, clothes, books, and a pair of shoes that looked like something Jess might sell. But as I scrolled further, I froze. There in plain sight were photos of some of my old toys. I clicked on one of the listings, my stomach sinking as I examined the details. It was a vintage board game I'd kept in pristine condition, one I'd played endlessly as a kid. The description mentioned a small mark on the corner of the box, a mark I knew all too well because I'd made it myself. Another listing showed an action figure from a set I'd spent months saving up for as a teenager. The figure was posed on a clean surface, its condition described as lightly used, great for collectors. My mind raced as I recognized not only the item, but the background of the photo. It was taken in Jess's room. I scrolled through her listings, each one a painful reminder of what was missing from the attic. Rare collectibles, childhood favorites, even a few items that held more sentimental value than monetary worth. They were all there, laid out for strangers to bid on. I didn't know whether to scream or cry. These weren't just toys. They were pieces of my childhood. Memories of weekends spent organizing my collection, saving up for new editions, and sharing stories about them with friends came flooding back. And now, they were reduced to eBay listings with starting bids that didn't even begin to reflect their true value, to me or anyone else. I grabbed my phone and started taking screenshots of every listing. I zoomed in on the photos, noting the details that proved the items were mine. The marks on the boxes, the way certain figures were posed, and even some handwritten labels I'd forgotten about until now. Once I had everything documented, I printed out the most damning listings for good measure. I didn't want to give Jess the chance to deny it when I confronted her, or when I showed my parents. But as I sat there staring at the evidence, I realized I wasn't ready to go full throttle just yet. Jess was a master at twisting the truth, and I needed to make sure my case was airtight. If I confronted her too soon, she'd just find a way to worm her way out of it. Instead, I decided to gather more proof. I went back up to the attic to see if there was anything left, any scraps or clues that could further solidify my argument. The shelves where my boxes had been stored were empty, but I noticed a small pile of packing tape scraps on the floor. It looked like Jess had hastily removed the boxes and left the evidence behind. I took photos of the empty space and the tape, adding them to my growing collection of evidence. I also checked the rest of the attic just in case. As I moved some boxes around, I found an old receipt from a collectibles store tucked under a shelf. It was from years ago, but listed several of the toys that were now missing. It wasn't much, but it was another piece of the puzzle. By the time Jess returned home that afternoon, I was ready to confront her. But I decided to wait. My parents needed to see the proof before I made my move. If Jess wanted to play games, I was going to make sure she couldn't wiggle out of this one. That night, I printed out the photos, listings, and screenshots and organized them into a neat stack. I left the stack on my nightstand, knowing that it was only a matter of time before Jess's lies came crashing down. The evidence was undeniable. Jess had taken my toys and sold them online, betraying my trust in a way I couldn't ignore. But as much as I wanted to call her out right then and there, I knew I had to be patient. Whatever excuse she tried to come up with, it wouldn't be enough. I was done playing nice. This wasn't just about the toys anymore. It was about the principle, and I wasn't going to let Jess get away with it. After spending the morning piecing together evidence from Jess's eBay account, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I might have missed something. As much as I hated being in the attic now, seeing the empty shelves where my collection used to be, I decided to go back for one more look. The attic was as silent and dusty as ever, but the absence of my boxes seemed louder than anything. I walked over to the shelves where I'd carefully stacked them all those years ago. The empty wood stared back at me, taunting me with its barrenness. This time I took a closer look at the floor. In the dim light, I noticed more scraps of packing tape that had fallen into the crevices between the boards. I crouched down and picked up a piece, running my fingers over the adhesive residue. It was sticky, fresh enough to suggest the boxes hadn't been gone for long. I snapped a few pictures of the empty shelves and the packing tape scraps with my phone, documenting every angle. If Jess thought she could deny her involvement, she'd have a hard time explaining why there was clear evidence of recently removed boxes. While scanning the attic, I also found something I hadn't noticed before, a stray piece of cardboard tucked behind an old storage bin. When I pulled it out, my breath caught. It was the side panel from one of my toy boxes, the same box I'd seen listed on Jess's eBay account. The panel still had the faint pencil marks I'd made as a kid, where I'd written, "Do not touch," in my wobbly handwriting. The fact that Jess had torn apart the boxes I'd carefully preserved was like a slap in the face. I added the cardboard panel to my growing pile of evidence and made my way back downstairs, feeling equal parts angry and determined. Jess's actions weren't just about selling some old toys. She'd deliberately gone through my belongings, dismantled them, and tried to erase any trace of what she'd done. That evening, as we all sat down for dinner, I decided to bring up the missing toys again. But this time, I was more calculated. I didn't want to accuse Jess outright and give her a chance to deflect. Instead, I wanted to lay the groundwork and let her reactions speak for themselves. "Hey, Mom," I said casually as I reached for the salad bowl. "Do you remember all the toys I kept in the attic?" My mom nodded immediately. "Of course. You were so particular about them. I remember you saying you'd save them for your kids someday." "Exactly," I said, glancing at Jess out of the corner of my eye. "So I thought it was strange when I went up there today and couldn't find them." Jess, who had been quietly scrolling through her phone, froze for a split second before returning to her usual nonchalant demeanor. "Are you sure you didn't move them?" my dad asked, his brow furrowed. "I didn't move them," I said firmly. "They're gone. Completely gone. The shelves are empty, and there's nothing left but some scraps of packing tape." My mom frowned. "That's odd. We haven't touched anything up there in years." I nodded. "That's what you said before. But it doesn't explain where everything went." Jess let out an exaggerated sigh and leaned back in her chair. "Maybe you just forgot where you put them." "It's not that deep, Sam." "It is that deep," I said, keeping my tone even. Those toys meant a lot to me, and I'd like to know what happened to them. Well, I don't know, Jess said, reaching for a drink. Maybe you're just being paranoid. Her response was predictable, but her body language told a different story. She couldn't keep her hands still, and she avoided looking at anyone directly. My dad looked between us, clearly sensing the tension. Are you accusing someone of taking them? Not yet, I said, locking eyes with Jess. But if I find out someone sold them without telling me, we're going to have a serious problem. Jess's face reddened slightly, but she kept her composure. Why would anyone want your old junk, Sam? You're being ridiculous. My mom chimed in, trying to defuse the situation. Let's not turn this into an argument. If the toys are really missing, we'll figure it out. Thanks, I said, though I knew my parents weren't going to be the ones to figure it out. The conversation shifted to other topics, but the air at the table remained heavy. Jess's attitude only solidified my suspicions. She wasn't just dismissive, she was defensive. As dinner wrapped up, I made a mental note to gather the rest of my evidence and prepare for the confrontation that was quickly becoming inevitable. Jess thought she could lie her way out of this, but she didn't know what I had in store. If she wanted to play innocent, I was ready to show her, and everyone else, the truth. By the next day, I had everything ready for the confrontation. My stack of printed screenshots sat neatly on the dining table, along with photos of the empty attic shelves, the cardboard panel with my handwriting, and the eBay listings with their damning descriptions. I wasn't about to let Jess wriggle out of this, and I wanted my parents to see the truth for themselves. That evening, after dinner, I waited until we were all in the living room to bring it up. Jess was lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone, while my parents sat in their usual spots, half watching the news. Hey Jess, I said, breaking the quiet. We need to talk about my toys. She groaned without looking up. Oh my God, are you still on about that? Let it go, Sam. I reached for the stack of papers and held them up. I would, except I found proof that you've been selling them on eBay. Jess's head shot up, her face instantly losing its color. What are you talking about? She stammered. I walked over to her and dropped the stack of papers on the coffee table in front of her. These are screenshots of your eBay listings, I said, pointing to the photos. Recognize anything? Her eyes widened as she scanned the pages, clearly caught off guard. These aren't yours, she said quickly, though her voice wavered. I got these at a garage sale. Really? I said, flipping through the pages. Because these markings on the boxes look exactly like the ones I made as a kid. You know, the ones that say, do not touch. Jess opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. Her gaze darted to my parents, who were now watching her with furrowed brows. What's going on here? My mom asked, her tone sharp. I didn't do anything. Jess blurted, her voice edging toward panic. Sam's making a big deal out of nothing. It's not nothing, I said firmly, holding up a page with one of the most damning listings. This is a photo of one of my rare action figures, taken on your desk. You're going to tell me you just happened to find the exact same one, in the exact same condition, at a garage sale? Jess's jaw clenched, but she stayed silent. Jess, my dad said, his voice unusually stern. Is this true? Did you sell Sam's toys? No, she said immediately, but the desperation in her voice was obvious. I didn't sell anything. Those are mine. They're not yours. I shot back, my anger rising. You went into the attic, took my stuff, and sold it online. And now you're lying about it. Jess glared at me, her face red. I said I didn't do it. I sighed and reached for the cardboard panel I'd found in the attic. Then explain this, I said, holding it up. It's from one of my boxes, Jess. It even has my handwriting on it. Are you going to tell me you found this at a garage sale, too? Jess's expression faltered, and for a moment, I thought she might actually confess. But instead, she crossed her arms and muttered, You're being ridiculous. My mom leaned forward, her gaze narrowing. Jess, I want the truth, she said firmly. Did you take Sam's toys and sell them? Jess hesitated, her eyes darting around the room like she was searching for an escape route. Finally, she let out a frustrated sigh. Fine, I sold them, okay? But it's not a big deal. They were just sitting up there collecting dust. The room went silent as my parents processed what she'd just admitted. My mom's face was a mix of shock and disappointment, while my dad looked like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. How could you do that, Jess? My mom asked, her voice trembling. I needed the money, Jess said defensively. It's not like Sam was using them. They've been up there for years. That doesn't make it right, my dad said, his tone stern. Those weren't yours to take. Jess rolled her eyes. Oh, come on. It's not like Sam even noticed until now. And besides, I didn't think anyone would care. I care, I said, my voice shaking with anger. Those toys weren't just things to me, Jess. They were memories, pieces of my childhood. And you sold them without even asking. Jess opened her mouth to argue, but my mom cut her off. Enough, she said, her voice cold. We'll talk about this later. Jess slumped back into the couch, crossing her arms like a petulant child. My parents turned to me, their expressions apologetic. Sam, I'm so sorry, my mom said. I had no idea she'd done this. I didn't either, my dad added. We'll make sure she makes this right. I nodded, though I wasn't sure how much comfort their words could offer. The damage had already been done, and no amount of apologies could bring back what Jess had taken from me. As I gathered my papers and headed to my room, I couldn't help but feel a mix of anger, sadness, and betrayal. Jess had finally admitted the truth, but it didn't make it any easier to accept. For now, all I could do was wait and see what my parents would do next, and hope that Jess finally understood the weight of what she'd done. The living room was suffocatingly quiet after Jess's admission. I had been waiting for her to crack, but hearing the words come out of her mouth still hit like a punch to the gut. Fine, she snapped, her voice filled with irritation rather than remorse. I sold them, okay? But you weren't even using them. They were just sitting up there collecting dust. For a moment, I couldn't even respond. My mind reeled, trying to process how she could justify what she'd done. She didn't sound sorry. She sounded annoyed, as if I were the one inconveniencing her by caring about my own belongings. My mom gasped, breaking the silence. Jess, how could you do that? Jess rolled her eyes, leaning back against the couch. I needed the money, she said defensively. It's not like you guys were going to help me out. I finally found my voice, though it came out sharper than I intended. So, stealing from me was your solution? I said, my voice trembling with anger. Do you have any idea how much those toys meant to me? They weren't just junk. They were my memories, Jess. Oh, give me a break, Jess shot back. You didn't even notice they were gone until now. If they were so important, maybe you shouldn't have left them to rot in the attic. Her words stung, but I refused to let her derail the conversation. That's not the point, I said, taking a step closer. They were mine. You had no right to touch them, let alone sell them. Jess looked away, crossing her arms like a child caught in a lie. You needed the money? My mom asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. For what, Jess? What could possibly justify this? Jess hesitated for a moment before muttering, Bills? What bills? My dad pressed, his voice unusually stern. She squirmed under his gaze. Credit cards, okay? I was behind on payments. It's not like I had a choice. That's a lie, I said flatly. I've seen the stuff you've been buying, new clothes, gadgets, all kinds of crap you don't need. This wasn't about paying bills, Jess. You just wanted spending money. Her face turned red, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But then she muttered, so what if I did? It's not like I hurt anyone. You didn't hurt anyone? I repeated, my voice rising. You stole from me, Jess. You went through my things, sold pieces of my childhood to random strangers. And now you're acting like it's no big deal. Sam's right, my mom said, her voice shaking with anger and disappointment. This isn't just a mistake, Jess. It's a betrayal. You knew how much those toys meant to him, and you sold them anyway. How could you do that to your brother? Jess's face hardened, and she let out a frustrated sigh. I didn't think he'd care, she snapped. They were just toys. I thought he'd get over it. Get over it, I said, shaking my head in disbelief. Just some of those toys were worth more than money. They were memories of birthdays, Christmas mornings, and weekends spent saving up for something special. And you threw all of that away for what? A shopping spree? Her defensiveness cracked for a moment, and I thought I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. But it was gone just as quickly, replaced by the same stubborn defiance. Well, it's done now, she said with a shrug. What do you want me to do about it? I'll tell you what you're going to do, my dad said, his voice firm. You're going to take responsibility for this. Every cent you made from those sales is going back to Sam, and I don't care how long it takes. What? Jess said, her eyes wide. You can't be serious. I'm dead serious, my dad said, crossing his arms. You stole from your brother, and you're going to make it right. End of discussion. For the first time, Jess looked genuinely nervous. She opened her mouth to argue, but my mom cut her off. Don't even try to argue, Jess, she said, her tone cold. We raised you better than this. I can't believe you'd do something so selfish and hurtful. Jess slumped back into the couch, crossing her arms and glaring at the floor. Fine, she muttered. Whatever. Her dismissive attitude only made me angrier, but I decided to let it go for now. My parents were finally holding her accountable, and that was a step in the right direction. As I gathered up my papers and evidence, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. relief that the truth was finally out, anger at Jess's betrayal, and sadness for what I'd lost. Jess might have thought she could brush this off and move on, but I wasn't about to let her forget what she'd done. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The silence that followed Jess's week, I didn't think he'd care, was deafening. For the first time in what felt like forever, my parents weren't jumping to her defense. Instead, they stared at her with expressions of disbelief and anger, waiting for her to offer something, anything, that might explain her actions. "You sold Sam's toys without asking," my dad said, his tone sharper than I'd ever heard it. "Where's the money now?" Jess hesitated, fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. I used it to pay off some bills," she mumbled, her voice barely audible. "What bills?" my mom demanded, her eyes narrowing. Jess squirmed in her seat, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. "You know, credit cards and stuff," she said, her words rushed and unconvincing. I crossed my arms, leaning forward slightly. "Credit cards?" I repeated. "That's interesting, considering I've seen you coming home with new clothes and gadgets every other week." "Which bills exactly are we talking about, Jess?" Her face flushed with embarrassment, and she glared at me. "Why do you even care? You're getting the money back, aren't you?" "That's not the point," I snapped. "The point is that you stole from me and lied about it. Now you're lying about where the money went. So, tell the truth. What did you spend it on?" Jess opened her mouth to argue, but my dad cut her off. "Enough, Jess," he said sternly. "You've already admitted to stealing and selling Sam's belongings. The least you can do now is be honest about what you did with the money." Her defiance crumbled under his harsh tone, and she finally muttered, "Fine. I bought some stuff, okay? Clothes, makeup, a new phone case. I didn't think it was a big deal." "A new phone case?" my mom said, her voice rising in disbelief. "Jess, you sold your brother's childhood memories to buy a phone case?" Jess flinched at the accusation, but didn't respond. "You've got to be kidding me," I said, shaking my head. "You had the nerve to sell off pieces of my childhood, stuff I've been saving for years, so you could blow the money on useless junk?" Jess crossed her arms, her cheeks red with anger and embarrassment. "It's not like I spent it all on junk," she said defensively. "I needed some of it for other things." "Like what?" my dad asked, his tone icy. "I don't know," Jess shouted. "Food, gas, stuff I actually needed. Not that it matters. It's gone now, okay." My mom stood up, her voice trembling with barely contained anger. "You don't get to decide what matters, Jess. What matters is that you stole from your brother and lied about it. And now you're acting like it's no big deal." I said, "I'm sorry," Jess yelled, standing up as well. "What more do you want from me?" "For starters," I said coldly, "I want you to take responsibility for what you did. That means admitting that this wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice. You chose to go into the attic, take my things, and sell them without asking. And you chose to spend the money on yourself instead of thinking about anyone else." Jess's face twisted with frustration. "Fine," she said through gritted teeth. "I screwed up, okay? I didn't think it would turn into such a big deal." "It's a big deal because you made it one," my dad said firmly. "And now you're going to fix it. Every cent you made from selling Sam's toys is going back to him. And I don't care if you have to sell everything you own to do it." Jess's jaw dropped, and she looked at him like he'd just suggested she donate a kidney. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious," my dad said. "You're going to make this right, Jess. End of discussion." My mom nodded in agreement, her expression stern. "And until you've paid back every cent, you're not buying anything else. No new clothes, no gadgets, no makeup, nothing. You've lost that privilege." Jess looked like she wanted to argue, but she seemed to realize it would only make things worse. Instead, she flopped back onto the couch, crossing her arms and glaring at the floor. "Fine," she muttered. For the first time, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. My parents were finally holding Jess accountable, and she couldn't talk her way out of it. But as much as I appreciated their support now, the damage had already been done. The money was gone, the toys were gone, and no amount of grounding or repayment was going to bring them back. As I sat there, watching Jess stew in her own guilt, I couldn't help but wonder, was this really the start of her taking responsibility? Or was it just another act, a way to pacify my parents until the heat died down? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain: I wasn't going to let my guard down anytime soon. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Jess's vague answers and defensive attitude weren't doing her any favors, and I could see my parents growing more frustrated by the second. It was clear she wasn't going to offer the truth willingly, so I decided to force the issue. "I don't believe you," I said, pulling out my phone and opening her eBay account. With a few quick taps, I brought up the sold listings, each one displaying photos of my toys, along with the prices they'd fetched. These listings sold for hundreds of dollars each. Where did it all go? Jess's eyes widened as she saw the screen, and she lunged forward, trying to grab the phone. "Give me that," she shouted. I stepped back, holding it out of reach. "You're not getting out of this," I said firmly. "Either tell the truth right now, or I'll show every single listing to Mom and Dad." My dad, who had been watching the exchange with a stormy expression, finally stepped in. "Enough," he said sharply, his tone cutting through the chaos. "Jess, you need to be honest right now. No more excuses, no more lies." Jess froze, her defiance melting into panic. Her gaze darted around the room, searching for a way out, but there was none. My parents were staring at her expectantly, and I wasn't about to back down. She slumped back onto the couch, covering her face with her hands. "Fine," she muttered, her voice barely audible. "Fine what?" my dad pressed. "Say it clearly." Jess lowered her hands, tears welling in her eyes. "I spent the money," she admitted, her voice trembling. "On what?" my mom demanded, her face a mixture of disbelief and anger. Jess hesitated, then broke down completely. "On clothes, okay? And makeup and stupid stuff I didn't even need," she said, her words tumbling out between sobs. "I didn't think it was a big deal. I didn't think Sam would even notice." Her confession sent a wave of emotions crashing over me. Anger, sadness, and a deep sense of betrayal. I couldn't believe she'd taken something so important to me and thrown it away for such trivial things. "Not a big deal," I repeated, my voice shaking. "Jess, do you have any idea how much those toys meant to me? They weren't just stuff sitting in the attic. They were memories, pieces of my childhood I'd been saving for years." "And you sold them for what? A new outfit? Lipstick?" Jess sobbed harder, but I wasn't feeling particularly sympathetic. "I told you to be honest," my dad said, his voice tight with anger. "But instead, you lied to us, stole from your brother, and spent the money on yourself without a second thought. Do you even realize how selfish that is?" "I'm sorry," Jess cried. "I wasn't thinking. I didn't mean to hurt anyone." My mom shook her head, her expression a mixture of disappointment and sadness. "Jess, this isn't just a mistake. It's a betrayal. You didn't just take things, you broke Sam's trust. And trust isn't something you can buy back with an apology." Jess buried her face in her hands, her sobs muffled by her fingers. I stood there, staring at her, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and emptiness. She'd finally admitted to what she'd done, but it didn't erase the hurt or bring back what I'd lost. My dad turned to me, his tone softening slightly. "Sam, I know this doesn't fix anything, but we'll make sure Jess takes responsibility for this. She's going to pay back every cent, even if it takes years." I nodded, though the gesture felt hollow. The money wasn't the point. It never had been. What Jess had taken from me wasn't just toys. It was trust, and no amount of repayment could fix that. As the room fell into an uneasy silence, I realized that this moment wasn't just about Jess's actions. It was a turning point for our family, a moment when we all had to confront the cracks in our relationships and decide whether we could rebuild them. Jess sat curled up on the couch, her tears slowing to sniffles, while my parents exchanged a heavy glance. For the first time, they seemed to truly grasp the depth of what had happened. "Jess," my mom said finally, her voice firm but gentle, "you have a lot to make up for, and it's going to take more than just paying Sam back. You need to prove that you're willing to change." Jess nodded weakly, but she didn't say anything. I turned to leave, my phone still in hand, feeling like I needed some space to process everything. As I walked up the stairs to my room, I couldn't help but wonder, was this the start of real accountability, or just another act to avoid consequences? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain: I wasn't going to let my guard down again. Jess might have admitted the truth, but trust would take much longer to rebuild. The moment Jess confessed, it felt like a dam broke in our family. For years, my parents had made excuses for her impulsive behavior, brushing off her missteps as part of growing up. But this time, there was no sidestepping the damage she'd done. Her betrayal wasn't just a personal affront. It had exposed the cracks in how we handled accountability as a family. My mom, who'd been teetering between shock and anger all night, was the first to lay down the law. "You're going to pay Sam back every cent," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. "I don't care how long it takes or what you have to sell, but you're going to fix this." Jess, still curled up on the couch, looked up at her with wide, tear-filled eyes. "But Mom—" "No buts," my mom interrupted. "You took something that didn't belong to you, and you lied about it. This is non-negotiable. My dad, who had been quiet for most of the confrontation, finally spoke. His tone was as sharp as a blade. "And you're grounded," he said. "No more shopping, no more eBay, no more spending money on anything but what's necessary. You've lost that privilege until you've paid Sam back in full." Jess's mouth fell open in disbelief. "Grounded? I'm 22 years old." "Exactly," my dad shot back. "You're old enough to know better, but you acted like a child. So, if you want to act like a child, we'll treat you like one." The humiliation on Jess's face was obvious, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. She'd crossed a line, and for once, my parents weren't sweeping it under the rug. Jess tried to argue, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and desperation. "How am I supposed to pay him back if I can't make money? This isn't fair." "Fair?" I said, finally speaking up. "You think this isn't fair? Jess, you sold my things, my memories for your own gain. And now you want to complain about fairness?" Jess flinched, but she didn't respond. "Sam's right," my mom said. "Fairness went out the window the moment you decided to steal from your brother. You're lucky we're even giving you a chance to make it right." My dad nodded in agreement. "And if you think we're overreacting, let me remind you that this could have gone a lot worse. Sam could have gone to the police. Do you really want to talk about what's fair?" That seemed to shut Jess up. She sank deeper into the couch, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as tears streamed down her face. I wasn't done, though. "And just so we're clear," I said, "this isn't just about paying me back. This is about earning back my trust. And that's going to take a lot more than money." Jess sniffled, her voice barely above a whisper. I said I was sorry. "Sorry isn't enough," I replied. "Not when you've done something like this. You don't just get to say sorry and move on, Jess. Actions have consequences." My parents exchanged a glance, and I could see that they agreed. For the first time, they weren't shielding her from the fallout of her decisions. "Your apology means nothing if you don't back it up with real change," my mom added. "So, starting tomorrow, you're going to sit down with Sam and figure out exactly how much you owe him. And then you're going to work out a plan to pay it back." The rest of the evening passed in uncomfortable silence. Jess sulked in the corner, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, while my parents and I discussed the logistics of her repayment plan. I wasn't naive enough to think this would fix everything. Trust wasn't something you could buy back with money, and the damage Jess had done would take a long time to heal. But seeing her finally face the consequences of her actions was a small step in the right direction. As I got up to head to bed, I glanced at Jess one last time. She looked defeated, her confidence completely shattered. And while a part of me wanted to feel bad for her, I couldn't bring myself to do it. This wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about accountability. Jess had made her choices, and now she was dealing with the fallout. For the first time in years, I felt like the dynamic in our family was shifting. My parents were finally holding Jess accountable, and she couldn't run from the consequences. Whether she learned from this or not was up to her, but one thing was certain. Things would never go back to the way they were. And maybe that was for the best. The weeks following Jess's confession were tense, but they marked the beginning of a slow shift in our family dynamic. True to my parents' word, Jess was forced to confront the consequences of her actions, and for the first time in a long while, she couldn't talk her way out of trouble. Every Saturday morning, Jess and I sat down at the dining table to go over her progress. She'd hand me a small stack of cash or a Venmo receipt. Never much, just $20 or $30 at a time. But it was a start. Watching her chip away at the debt she owed me felt surreal. Jess had always been good at avoiding responsibility, yet here she was, inching toward accountability, albeit reluctantly. I'd be lying if I said the money made up for what she'd done. No amount could replace the sentimental value of my toys or erase the sting of betrayal I'd felt. But seeing her take steps, however small, toward making things right was better than nothing. What surprised me the most was my parents' change in attitude. Shortly after the confrontation, they pulled me aside for a heart-to-heart. "Sam," my mom said, her voice heavy with guilt, "I want to apologize. We should have believed you from the start. We've spent so much time trying to protect Jess that we forgot to protect you too." My dad nodded, his expression somber. "We've let her get away with too much, and that's on us. But we're going to do better, starting now." Their words felt genuine, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope that our family could heal. While their initial disbelief still stung, their willingness to acknowledge their mistakes and take action helped mend some of the tension that had built up over the years. From then on, they made a conscious effort to check in with me more often, asking how I was doing and offering support as I dealt with the fallout of Jess's actions. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. As for Jess, our relationship remained strained. She'd apologized several times since the confrontation, but her words often felt hollow, more like something she thought she had to say rather than something she truly felt. "Sam," she said one evening, handing me another small repayment, "I really am sorry. I didn't think this would hurt you as much as it did." I nodded, accepting the money but not the apology. "I appreciate the effort, Jess, but it's going to take more than words to fix this." She looked hurt, but she didn't argue. Maybe she was starting to understand that trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. Through it all, I learned an important lesson about boundaries. Family is supposed to be your safe haven, but that doesn't give them the right to take advantage of you. Jess's betrayal taught me that even with the people closest to you, it's okay to set limits and stand up for yourself. I've forgiven Jess, but I haven't forgotten. Forgiveness, I've realized, isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of anger and resentment. But forgetting? That's another story entirely. The toys I lost are gone forever, and so is the trust one once had in Jess. What remains is a cautious optimism that things can get better, but only if everyone puts in the work. If there's one thing I know for sure, it's this. Rebuilding trust is like putting together a puzzle. It takes patience, effort, and a willingness to see the bigger picture. And while we're still far from finished, at least we've started.